Hello, my name is William, and welcome to Dragon X Dominion, a realm where dragon legends are forged in fire, honor, and forgotten worlds. I will be your narrator and guide through these epic lands. If you crave powerful stories, legendary dragons, and wars that echo through eternity, then you found your home, ladies and gentlemen. So like, subscribe, and claim your place among these legends. The smell of cold metal and recycled air was something Nora Vance had memorized long before she could name it. She had grown up on stations, had learned their personalities the way other kids learned faces. This one, Aura Prime, smelled like engine coolant near the lower lifts and like something faintly sweet near the biology wing. She liked the biology wing. It hummed. She was 16 and had been blind since birth. Not tragically blind, just blind. She used an echolocation implant tucked behind her left ear, a small smooth device her mother had saved 3 years of station wages to buy. It sent out pulses too high for anyone else to hear, and returned a picture of the world to the part of Nora's brain that had long ago decided to use whatever information it was given. She also used her hands, her feet, the pressure of air against her cheeks. She had built her own map of every place she had ever lived, and the map was good. Her mother, Dr. Lena Vance, was a xenobiologist. She studied living things that were not human, which meant she was always somewhere she was not supposed to bring her daughter. Nora came anyway. Nobody stopped her because nobody expected a blind teenage girl to wander into restricted research space alone. This was a mistake people made once. It was late in the station cycle when Nora slipped through the side corridor into the lower lab. Her mother was in a budget meeting 3 floors up. The lab was quiet except for the background hum of the ventilation and the soft mechanical rhythm of monitoring equipment. Nora walked the perimeter first the way she always did, one hand not quite touching the wall, just feeling the air change near obstacles. She passed a row of sample tanks, a cold storage unit, 3 examination tables. She knew this room. She had been here before. But tonight something was different. There was a sound. Or not exactly a sound, more like the edge of one. A vibration so fine and so low that her implant only caught it because she had stopped moving. It was coming from the far corner of the room where a large enclosure had been set up behind a clear barrier. She had walked past it on her last visit, and her implant had told her it was empty. Tonight, it was not. She moved toward it slowly. The vibration changed as she got closer. Not louder, but more detailed, like a voice becoming clearer through static. It had a rhythm to it, uneven, like breathing that was trying to be quiet. She stopped about 2 feet from the barrier and stood still. She was not afraid. She had learned early that fear of the unknown was mostly just fear of not having enough information, and the best cure for that was to wait and gather more. Whatever was on the other side of that barrier was small. Her implant sketched a rough shape, low to the ground, compact, about the size of a large dog, but different in proportion. Wider at the shoulder, a longer neck, and it was not moving. It was watching her. She could not say how she knew that, but she did. She thought about calling out. She did not. Instead, she did what she always did when she was somewhere new and uncertain. She hummed. It was not a tune exactly, more of a low, steady note she used to anchor herself. She had done it since she was small. It helped her think. The vibration from the enclosure changed. It did not grow louder, but it shifted. The rhythm slowed, became less jagged. Whatever was in there had heard her. Nora stood in the dark laboratory with her hands at her sides and hummed quietly to herself. And on the other side of the barrier, a creature that had not eaten in 2 days and had not slept properly since it had hatched into a world that felt too loud and too sharp and too demanding, crawled 3 inches closer to the sound. She stayed for about 10 minutes. Then she heard the lift at the end of the corridor activate, her mother coming back early, and she quietly left the way she came. Behind her, the creature stayed where it had moved to, close to the barrier, closer than it had been to anything since it arrived. In the morning, Nora's mother mentioned over breakfast that the dragon hatchling in the lower lab was still refusing to bond with its handlers. The Dracori delegation was running out of patience. If nothing changed in the next few days, they would consider other options. She said it carefully, the way adults say things they do not want to have to explain further. Nora ate her food and said nothing, but she was already thinking about that sound, that almost sound, that small, careful, barely there vibration that felt, and she had no better word for it, like a question. She had heard questions like that before. She had asked a few herself, in rooms where no one was listening. She went back the next day. The second time Nora visited the lower lab, she brought nothing. No book, no device, no snack. She had thought about what to bring and decided that bringing things was the wrong instinct. Whatever was in that enclosure did not need things. It needed something harder to carry. She found her way back to the same spot in front of the barrier. The hum of monitoring equipment was the same. The cold was the same. And the vibration, that fine, barely there signal that her implant had caught the night before, was there too. Still low, still uneven. But present, she sat down on the floor cross-legged, which was not the most dignified thing to do in a research lab, but was the most honest way she knew to say she was not in a hurry. She started talking. Not to the creature specifically. She did not even have a name for it yet. But just out loud, the way she sometimes did when she was working through something. She described her morning. The way the upper corridors smelled different near the diplomatic quarters because the atmospheric mix was adjusted for species who preferred more nitrogen. The particular sound the food dispenser in their quarters made before it dispensed, a mechanical reluctance she found funny. The temperature difference between the station's sun-facing side and its shadow side, which she could feel just by standing near the outer hull. She described things the way she experienced them. Not what they looked like. She had no use for that, but what they felt like, sounded like, what pressure they had in the air. She talked about the weight of the station itself, the deep structural vibration she could feel through the floor if she pressed her palm flat against it, the way the recycling systems pulsed on a 19-minute cycle that nobody else seemed to notice. She did not know if the creature could understand any of it. It probably could not. Standard translation matrices were not loaded into research enclosures. But she was not talking to be understood. She was talking because silence in an unfamiliar room was a kind of pressure, and she was trying to release it. At some point, she stopped and just sat quietly. The vibration from the enclosure had changed while she was speaking. It had smoothed out. The ragged edge she had noticed the day before was gone. Whatever was on the other side was not calm exactly, but it was less distressed. She could feel the difference through her implant, the way you feel a person relax when you stop demanding something from them. Then something touched the barrier. She felt it through the floor first. A very slight shift in the structure, almost nothing, the kind of thing that only registers if you are the kind of person who has spent 16 years paying attention to structural vibration. Then her implant told her something had made contact with the clear surface about 18 inches to her right and slightly below her shoulder level. She turned her head toward it. She could not see it, but she knew something was there. She moved slowly, shifting her weight to face it. She reached out and pressed her palm flat against the barrier. Not grabbing, not knocking, just there. The vibration she felt through the barrier was different from anything her implant had ever returned to her. It was not mechanical. It had a pulse to it. Not regular like a heartbeat, but layered, like multiple rhythms running at slightly different speeds braided together. Her implant did not know what to make of it. But her brain, which had long ago learned to build pictures out of incomplete data, filed it away as something specific. Something it would recognize again. They stayed like that for about 30 seconds. Then Nora quietly took her hand back, said okay to the empty air, and stood up and left. She did not see the log. She did not know that a monitor in the corner of the lab was recording everything. That a Drakori handler named Sovek had been watching the feed from his quarters when the notification came through that the hatchling had moved to the barrier for the first time in days. She did not know that Sovek had replayed the footage 4 times and then sat very still for a while before picking up his communication device. She also did not know what the hatchling was. Not yet. She knew it was alive. She knew it was young. She knew it was in some kind of distress that had nothing to do with physical injury. She recognized that kind of distress because it was the kind that came from being surrounded by people who were trying to help you in all the wrong ways. She went back to the upper levels and had dinner with her mother and did not mention the lower lab because mentioning it would lead to a conversation about danger and protocol that would miss the point entirely. Rael, she did not know his name yet, but Rael stayed pressed against the barrier for 3 hours after she left. Not watching the door exactly, because his eyes were still adjusting to the spectrum of artificial light, and he found it easier to close them. But oriented toward the place where she had been. Waiting in the specific way that very young things wait for the sound to come back. It was the first time since hatching that he had chosen to be close to anything. 2 floors up, Savek finished composing his report to Elder Davon and sent it. The subject line was short. He had thought about it for a while before settling on words that were technically accurate without being dramatic. But even he had to admit, sitting alone in his quarters with the footage still open on his screen, that what he had watched was not something he had words for yet. A human child, sitting on a cold floor, talking about the sound of a food dispenser, and a hatchling who had refused every trained handler, walking slowly toward her voice in the dark. Nobody told Nora what to wear to a formal meeting with a Dracori elder. Her mother told her to be respectful, which was not the same thing as useful advice. Nora wore what she always wore, dark trousers, a plain shirt, her boots, which had thin grip pads on the sole that gave her more vibration information from the floor. She ran her fingers along the wall seam as they walked to the diplomatic suite on the upper ring, building the route in her memory the way she always did. The room was large. She knew that before she stepped inside. The acoustics shifted when the door opened. A long echo, high ceiling, hard surfaces, designed to feel vast. She walked in with her mother beside her and did not slow down or hesitate because hesitation in a room like this was something people read as weakness, and she had no patience for that particular game. The elder was already there. She could feel him, not literally, but in the way a room changes when it contains something large and very still. The air displacement was different near the far end of the chamber, heavy, somehow, like the presence of a creature that had lived long enough to stop wasting energy on unnecessary movement. His name was Davon. He spoke through a translation device that rendered his voice in flat, careful standard. He told them what was happening. The hatchling, the bond that had not formed, the diplomatic weight of the situation. The hatchling was not just any Dracori. He was the third son of the High Matriarch. His failure to bond was not simply a biological problem. It was a political one. Nora listened without interrupting. Her mother was very still beside her in the way she went still when she was worried. Davin showed them the footage. Nora could not see it, obviously, but nobody seemed to realize that for a moment. Then her mother said quietly, "Nora can't see the screen." And there was a small pause in the room that felt like the pause after you drop something you did not mean to drop. Davon said, after that pause, "I know." And then he described what the footage showed. His voice was careful and precise. He described Nora sitting on the floor. He described her talking. He described the hatchling moving to the barrier. He described the 30 seconds of palm contact. "What did you do?" Davon asked. "When you went to that room, I talked," Nora said. "And then I listened to him," she said. "Or at him the first night. But then to him." Davon was quiet for a moment. "You did not know what he was." "Not the first night," she said. "I knew the second night. My mother had mentioned a hatchling that wouldn't bond. I put it together." "You went back knowing," Davan said. "Not a question, a confirmation." "Yes! Why?" Nora thought about how to answer that. She had several answers, and most of them were true, but some of them were more true than others. She picked the most true one, because he was making a sound that felt like asking a question, and nobody was answering it. The room was quiet. Davin asked if she would participate in a formal bonding introduction. Supervised. Safe. He made clear that no human had ever bonded with a Dracori. It was not something their science considered biologically possible. But Rael's vital readings had changed during her visits in ways that did not have another explanation. He was not asking her to fix anything. He was asking her to try. She asked only one question. Will he be safe either way, whether it works or not? Devon said yes. The hatchling would not be harmed regardless of the outcome. Nora said, then I'll try. Her mother said nothing in the meeting. She waited until they were in the corridor with the door closed. Then she said, carefully and with real care behind the words, that she was not sure this was a good idea. Nora was being used, she said, by people, by species, who had spent the entire human membership in the cooperative treating humanity like a footnote. Now that they needed something from a human, suddenly it was worth asking. Nora had thought about this too. She stopped walking and turned toward her mother's voice. I know, she said. You're right about them. But Rael isn't them. He didn't ask to be born into this situation any more than I asked to be born on a station designed for people with eyes. Nobody consulted him either. Her mother was quiet. I'm not doing it for Davon, Nora said. I'm doing it because there's a creature in a room downstairs who moved toward my voice in the dark. And I know what that's like. To move toward the only thing that doesn't feel like a test. The corridor hummed around them. Distant engine sounds. The 19-minute recycling cycle, right on schedule. Her mother put a hand on her shoulder and didn't argue anymore. Word moved through the station quickly, the way things do in closed habitats. By the next meal cycle, every crew section had heard something. A human girl, a Dracori hatchling, a bonding attempt. Most of the non-human representatives called it impossible. Some called it inappropriate. The human crew, engineers, biologists, deck staff, said very little, but in a way that meant they were paying attention. Nora went to bed and lay still and listened to the station breathe around her and thought about the sound Rael made against the barrier. That layered vibration, those braided rhythms running at different speeds. Her implant had no category for it, but she did. It sounded like someone who had been talking to themselves for so long they had almost stopped expecting a reply. She understood that fluently. The introduction was set for the following morning. They brought Rael in first. Nora waited in the side corridor and listened to the sounds of the bonding chamber while the handlers settled him inside. She heard their footsteps, their low voices, the specific acoustics of a large circular room with no furniture and soft wall panels. She built the room in her head before she entered it. Devon had explained the procedure. She would walk in alone, no handlers, no barriers. She could leave at any time. Rael could leave at any time. Nothing would be forced. The chamber was the most neutral space on the station. No electromagnetic equipment, no strong light sources, no sharp smells from chemicals or machinery. Just air and space. Nora reached into her pocket before she went in. Her fingers found the small piece of basalt that lived there. A smooth dark stone about the size of a large coin. A piece of actual earth rock her mother had given her years ago. She had carried it so long that the edges were warm from her body heat. She rubbed her thumb across it once and then walked in. The door sealed behind her. The room was warm and very quiet. She stopped just inside and let her implant run. The echo came back clean. Circular walls, no obstacles, high ceiling, soft floor. About 15 meters across. The ventilation was gentler here than in the rest of the station, barely a whisper. She could feel Rael. Not with her eyes, not exactly with her implant. More with the sensitive awareness of air pressure that she had spent her whole life developing. Something large was in the far half of the room, very still, watching her with whatever senses it used. She walked to the center of the room and sat down on the floor. Not near him. Not away from him. Just in the middle, the way she would sit if the room were empty and she was thinking. She took the stone out of her pocket and began turning it in her fingers. Left hand, right hand, thumb across the flat face, index finger around the edge. She had done this 10,000 times. It was not a nervous habit. It was more like a metronome, something to keep the body calm so the mind could be quiet. In the observation room above, 12 people watched the feed. 6 Dracori delegates, 4 human crew members who had no official reason to be there, but Davin had not stopped them. 1 xenobiologist who kept her hands folded very tightly in her lap. 1 diplomatic aide who had given up trying to write notes. 11 minutes passed. Nothing happened. One of the Dracori delegates began typing something into his communication device. Then Rail moved. Not fast, not in the way of threat or excitement. He moved the way things move when they have been very still for a long time and have finally made a decision. 1 step, then another. He crossed the room in slow, careful increments and stopped about 2 feet from where Nora sat. She felt the air change. Her implant updated the room, something large, now close, oriented toward her. She kept her hands moving on the stone. She did not reach out. She did not say anything. Rail lowered his head until it was roughly level with hers. He extended 1 wing to the side, not dramatically, just enough to open the membrane. His wing membrane was how he read electromagnetic fields in detail. He had done this with every handler they had tried and had found their signatures too strong, too regular, too much like a signal demanding a response he did not know how to give. He read Nora. What he found was silence where there should have been a signal. No electromagnetic field in the standard Dracori range. Instead, there was something else. A faint, complex pattern from the implant behind her ear and from the way her nervous system processed the world. It was not a Dracori resonance. It was not anything in his entire short catalog of experience. It was new, and it was irregular. Layered rhythms at different speeds, not quite synchronized, exactly like his own. In the observation room, a Dracori biologist said something quiet to Davon in their own language. Davon did not respond. He was watching the feed very carefully. Rail put his head down in Nora's lap. Not gently, not roughly. Just down, with the particular weight of a creature that had been holding tension for days, and had decided, for the first time, to put it somewhere. Nora went still. Then, very slowly, she moved her left hand from the stone to the side of his neck. She did not stroke or pat. She just placed her hand there where she could feel the slow pulse of something large and alive, and finally at rest. They stayed like that. Devon, in the observation room, turned away from the monitor after a while. Not because he was not interested. Because some things do not need to be watched to be understood. He said something in Dracori. His aide translated for the human crew members. She did not bond with him the way we bond. She bonded with him the way he is. Nobody spoke for a while after that. The stone was still in Nora's right hand. She had forgotten she was holding it. She became aware of it again only when Rail made a sound. The lowest possible range of his voice, below what most of the monitoring equipment registered, and she felt the vibration of it move through his neck, through her palm, up her arm, into her chest. It did not sound like a word. It did not need to. It sounded like an answer. 1-word transmission from the Dracori homeworld arrived 4 hours later. Davin read it and stood very still for a long time. Then he went to find Nora. She was in the corridor outside the chamber, sitting against the wall with the stone in her hand, listening to the station hum around her. "The High Matriarch," he said, "wants to meet you." Nora turned the stone over in her fingers once. Then she said, "Okay." The gravity on Varath was 1.4 standard. Nora felt it the moment she walked off the shuttle ramp. A heaviness in her legs and chest, like wearing a coat made of water. The air was thick and tasted faintly of something mineral, something old. The sky, she was told, was permanent cloud cover. She did not need to be told. She could hear the absence of a hard horizon, could feel the pressure of a sky that was close and full. She had never been on a planet. She had grown up on stations and ships. Planets had different sounds than stations. Not mechanical rhythms, but something more uneven, more alive. Wind through structural gaps. The distant movement of something that was not engineered. She stood at the bottom of the ramp and just listened for a moment before Rail nudged her elbow with the side of his head. She put her hand on his neck and they walked together, The Dracori court was enormous. Her implant worked harder here than anywhere she had ever been. The space was too large to map quickly, full of movement and competing signals. The electromagnetic presence of so many Dracori in one place made her implant stutter slightly, small gaps in the picture it returned to her. She compensated by moving more slowly and feeling the floor more carefully through her boots. Rails stayed pressed against her left side the entire walk to the main chamber. Several elder Dracori they passed turned to look. She could not see their expressions, but she could hear the quality of the silence that followed them. The particular kind of quiet that meant people were watching and deciding what to think. She had lived inside that kind of silence most of her life. She was not bothered by it. The High Matriarch Vareth Sol was waiting at the far end of the receiving hall. Nora heard her before she reached her, not a sound exactly, but a weight of presence that her body registered as pressure, a drop in the air in the way a building casts shadow, something vast and very old and very awake. When they stopped, Nora could feel the examination happening even if she could not point to any specific sensation. She stood straight and kept her hand on Rael's neck and waited. She had learned very young that being examined was something you endured by simply being exactly what you were. Any performance made it worse. Vareth Sol spoke. The sound was subsonic enough that Nora felt it in her sternum before the translation earpiece rendered it in standard. The voice in her ear was flat and careful, stripped of tone. What do you want from my son? Nora had thought about this on the journey here, not to prepare an answer, but because the question was worth thinking about honestly. She said, "Nothing. I just didn't want him to be alone." Silence. "You cannot see him." "No," Nora said. "Then what do you know of what he is?" Nora thought about that. I know what he sounds like when no one is asking anything from him. I know what his breathing sounds like when he decides something. I know where he puts his weight when he's tired." She paused. "I know what it feels like when he's next to me and what the air feels like when he's not. That's what I know." The room was very quiet. Rael, beside her, had not moved. Vareth Sol asked, "How do you know what he is? Not his nature, his self. How do you know him?" Nora said, "Because he told me." Not in words, but he told me. Another silence. Longer this time. Nora heard something shift in the hall. Not movement exactly, but attention. The quality of the listening around her changed. Then Vareth Sol asked what Nora had heard in the enclosure the first night, not what she observed. What she heard, Nora answered without thinking, because it was not an answer that needed thought. A frequency like a question asked into empty space with no expectation of an answer, she said. The kind of sound a person makes when they've been asking for long enough that they've almost forgotten what asking feels like. She heard her own voice in the large hall and added, "I was 7 the first time I heard that sound come out of myself. I was sitting in a school common room on a station where everything, every display, every light panel, every navigation map was built for people with eyes I don't have. And I was just sitting there waiting for someone to notice I was in the room." She stopped. The hall was absolutely still. Then something happened that nobody in the diplomatic delegation, not even Devon, had ever seen. Vareth Sol lowered her head. It was a slow movement, deliberate. Not a bow in the human sense, but a specific Dracori gesture that Devon would later explain carried the weight of acknowledgement between equals of different kinds. She had not made that gesture in over 300 years. The formal recognition was recorded in the Dracori archives that afternoon. The bond was declared valid. Rael was given his adult recognition, early, unprecedented, but uncontested. And Nora was given a title in the old Dracori language. Davin translated it later as best he could. The closest standard rendering was, "She who hears the unspoken." Nora said the translation was fine, but asked if she could hear the original. Davon said it in Dracori, and her implant picked up the sound structure even without understanding it. She asked him to say it again. She wanted to know the shape of it. She did not know yet that a formal challenge had already been drafted and filed by a faction of the court who considered the bond a violation of tradition. That challenge would become the next crisis. But that evening, on a planet she had never stood on before, Nora sat outside in the bioluminescent dark with Rael asleep beside her and one hand resting on his warm side, and listened to the sound of a world that was not designed for humans at all. It was the most comfortable she had felt in a long time. She was building the map already. The Grand Hearing Chamber of Varath was older than most human languages. Its walls held the records of 10,000 years of Dracori law carved into stone in a script that coiled and turned like living things. Nora could not see any of it, but she could feel the age in the room, in the resonance of the stone under her feet, in the cool, dry air that tasted like something that had been still for centuries. Old rooms had a specific kind of weight. This one was very old. She sat in the center of the floor where she had been directed, with Rael seated to her left. Around them in a wide arc sat the High Council, 9 elders, each representing a pillar of Dracori civilization. The diplomatic frequency was open to the entire galactic cooperative. Every species with a signal receiver was listening. The traditionalist faction presented their case first. The speaker was an elder named Sorath. His voice was measured and clear through the translation feed. He presented the science of Dracori bonding without drama, how it worked, what it required, what it produced. Then he presented the central problem. A true bond required full sensory reciprocity. A Dracori bonded partner must be perceived in full. Their electromagnetic signature read, analyzed, and matched. Without that, the bond was incomplete. A hatchling who could not form a complete bond could not develop properly. The conclusion was clinical and not unkind. The human girl could not perceive a Dracori, therefore no true bond existed. The documentation should be corrected. Several council members asked questions. Sorath answered them precisely. His logic was sound and grounded in evidence that stretched back 4,000 years. Then Nora was given the floor. She stood up slowly. She did not bring notes because she had none. She had the stone in her pocket and she left it there. She turned to face the general direction of the council from the sound of their last voices. She said, "I want to ask the council a question before I say anything else. Can any of you tell me what Rael's resonance signature feels like from the inside? Not how it reads on a sensor. What it feels like to him." Silence. She waited. Nobody answered. "I can tell you," she said, "because he showed me. Not in a language I can transcribe. But he showed me in the way that he moves and breathes, and the pressure of his weight and the sound his presence makes in a room." She paused. "It feels like standing in a large space and calling out, and hearing your echo come back slightly wrong. Not because the space is broken, but because it is shaped in a way that no map accounts for. Every person who has ever tried to reach him brought a map and found that the map was wrong. And they decided the space was defective." She let that sit for a moment. "I didn't bring a map," she said. "I've never had maps made for me. Every map I have, I built from the beginning, out of sound and air and pressure and the way temperature changes near walls. When I found Rael, I didn't have a template for what he was supposed to be, so I just paid attention to what he was. His resonance is not irregular in the way a broken thing is irregular. It is irregular in the way that any unique thing is irregular. It is the shape of him." She heard something shift in the chamber. "Not movement, attention." "The challenge says I cannot perceive a Dracori," she said. "That is true. I cannot perceive a Dracori the way a Dracori perceives one, but I am not Dracori. I perceive Rael the way he perceives himself, as something that does not fit the standard measurements, navigating a world built for a different shape. I have done that every day of my life. I did not bond with him despite being blind. I bonded with him because everything my blindness taught me about building a world from scratch made me the first person who was not trying to make him fit a map he was never going to fit." She stopped. The chamber was completely quiet. "You asked what it means to fully perceive something," she said. "I don't know what it means in your science. In mine, in the way I live, it means paying attention to what something actually is instead of what you expected it to be. I don't know which kind matters more to a bond." She turned slightly toward where Rael sat. but I know which kind mattered to him. She sat back down. The council deliberated for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The challenge was dismissed. Unanimous. What happened next was not in any diplomatic record because nobody had prepared a protocol for it. Rael, who had been sitting very still through the entire proceeding, made a sound. It was not loud. It was the lowest vocalization in the Dracori register. A sound hatchlings made when they were safe and at rest. A sound that Elder Dracori had not heard from a young one in a formal chamber in living memory. It moved through the stone floor of the chamber and up through Nora's boots, and she felt it before she heard it. She leaned toward him, not dramatically. Just slightly, the way you lean toward warmth. Davin, standing near the chamber entrance, heard one of the human crew members somewhere in the observer section exhale very slowly. He understood the feeling. Outside the chamber, the bioluminescent flora of Varath was doing what it did in the evening, shifting color slowly from pale gold to deep blue, painting the air in light that required no sun. Nora and Rael walked out into it together. His wing came to rest across her shoulders, not guiding her. She did not need guiding. Just there, present, the weight of it warm and certain. She walked with her face slightly turned upward, reading the air the way she always did. He walked with his irregular resonance, sending its strange, unclassifiable signal into the world the way he always had. Neither of them was lost. They never had been. They had just been waiting in separate dark rooms for something that sounded like an answer, and had found, against every expectation of every civilization watching, that the answer had been in the other room all along.